Okay, good evening, everyone. It's right on 7. Just noticed my clock is not quite right, so I'll fix that up right now. Welcome. It's really lovely to be with you this evening, and I'm going to get started so that we finish right on time. This session is being recorded. You will not be on screen, and but during the Q&A, I may read your questions out, but they are completely anonymous. So feel free to engage in that way, knowing that this is a private webinar, private space to learn about wellbeing. All right, I'm going to put my slides up. Which I'll do right now. And just going to have to go back a little bit. They weren't quite in the right spot. There we go. Now, I worked out as I was preparing tonight that I started this initiative in April 2020. Offering these, well, they were weekly at that stage, weekly wellbeing webinars, and they were free for all of 2020, and then I put a price point on them in 2021, 2022. I've just raised the price slightly, so thank you to those people who are sticking with me and not minding that slight price rise. But I did work out that it's the 50th one I have done, the 50th Heliotropia Wellbeing webinar in this, I guess, this online series. So I'm delighted to celebrate this 50th with you this evening, and want to say thank you to all the people who have been coming along and engaging with this work over that period of time. Now, this is being recorded, so if for some reason you need to leave, then I will be able to see that in my data points later, and so I will send through the recording. And sometimes people book in the full knowledge that they won't be in the room, and we have a few people tonight in that situation. And so, of course, they'll be getting the recording too. So this webinar tonight is called HELIO New Year 2023. And I did something similar 2021, 2022, although this one is completely different. And as we move through, I will talk a little bit about my own approach to learning and growing, and not just getting stuck into a routine of doing the same things over and over again. Really, the purpose of tonight, and perhaps the reason you've decided to sign up, is that as 2023 dawns, many of us continue to feel the after effects, I guess, of the global pandemic. And it's been such a major disruption, and it has made a lot of changes in people's lives. But one of the great things that has come out of the pandemic is that evidence-based wellbeing has become a top priority for many, many people. And like any other priorities in life, wellbeing requires awareness, it requires practice, it requires effort to bring it to life. So tonight with you, I'm inviting you to imagine and create a healthy and resilient plan for 2023. And the HELIO framework, which is an evidence-based framework, it's absolutely grounded in research. It's a simple structure for day-to-day, activating day-to-day ways to personally craft wellbeing for yourself. So beginning with ourselves, and then, of course, we ripple out through the layers, and we'll talk a bit about that as well, because I do take a systems approach in all of my work. So I'd like to begin by asking you if you have phones nearby, or you have anything that might fragment your attention, I would invite you just to put that away. And we're going to acknowledge country, but I'm also going to just take a moment to ground and prepare for this hour. And I invite you just to stop with me for a moment. This may be the first time you've stopped today. And if so, even more important. And I invite you to place your feet on the floor. In this way, we connect to the ground beneath us. We connect to our home, planet Earth. And it's not too much of a stretch to imagine that we are connecting with one another through all of these feet grounding on planet Earth, our shared home. And my feet alongside your feet and all the other people who are here tonight. This is a collective experience, even though it's online and virtual. We are here in this virtual room together. And so I just invite you to take some deep breaths. We're only going to do 3 or 4, but just entirely focusing on the breath as you do. And you don't need to breathe in any particular way. You've been doing it since the moment you were born, but just inviting you to create the opportunity for a really deep in-breath and a cleansing out-breath. And so I invite you to put down any to-do list that you may have, or any thoughts about what you need to do next after the webinar, and any frustrations that you might have carried with you from today, just to put them down. That look, they'll still be there in an hour, but for now, this is time for you and for us as a collective to bring our attention to not only our own well-being, but the capacity of well-being to then ripple out to the people we love, to the communities we share and love. And on that note, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this beautiful community on the Bellarine Peninsula in Victoria, the Wadawurrung people, who for hundreds of generations have nurtured, cared for, and been deeply spiritually connected to this land, to the sea, to the waterways, to the sky, to the stars. And I acknowledge and thank them for their continuing custodianship of this land. And I invite you to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which you are this evening, on which your feet are grounded and connected. It's also the year of the rabbit. So in wishing a HELIO New Year to you all, I also would like to wish any people in our webinar space tonight who are celebrating Chinese New Year. Just 2 nights ago, the full moon, January 22, the year of the rabbit. If you're not familiar with the Chinese zodiac, I would warmly encourage you to take some time to learn a little bit about it. The reference I have there under the illustration is a good one, studycli.org, because it's deeply embedded in nature, deeply embedded in the philosophy of nature and humans being one and having a deeply reciprocal relationship. Rabbits are predicted to be gentle, quiet, elegant, alert, quick, skillful, kind, patient, and very responsible. I am a rabbit, and I'm just reminded today and over the last couple of days that it's a special year for us rabbits. Those I do align with those strengths that are mentioned there. But I can also overplay them, and we'll talk about that later as well. So I think most people know me, although I think there are some people who will be watching this tomorrow and have not been to one of my webinars before. So my name is Lisa Barker. Heliotropia means turn towards the sun, and in nature and in psychology, the heliotropic effect is the tendency for all living systems, including us, to turn towards what enables life, what is uplifting for our lives, and to turn away from what depletes us, what detracts from life. And if we do this enough, we thrive. I have a long career in teaching, and the experiential knowledge gained over 30 years is enormous for me in terms of well-being, the well-being of myself and others. And then more recently, I've studied the wellbeing science and coaching, and also systems thinking through theory U. So I bring with you lots of research-based knowledge, but heaps of practical, highly practical, experiential knowledge as well. Here's a quote from me to begin with. Wellbeing is not just a buzzword. It is a way of life, and it is achieved one intentional step at a time. It's not some enormous thing that we have to strive to perhaps achieve at the end of our lives, by the end of our lives. It is a way of life. And I hope tonight to really encourage you to see that imagining and creating a healthy and resilient 2023 is a day-by-day proposition. Every single day counts. So this is a wonderful quote or metaphor that I love to think about a lot. Wherever we decide to place our attention, our time and our energy will follow. And my inspiration here, of course, is the mermaids here on Wadawurrung country. They meet every morning at the sea at 7:30. I may even have some mermaids in the room tonight. And this sets them up very intentionally for the day. And that doesn't mean that things don't happen during that day that are challenging and difficult and frustrating and perhaps very, very sad. But this is a way in which to set their day up in a very heliotropic way. And so I want to thank the mermaids for their inspiration, ongoing inspiration. So let's dive in. This is what we're doing tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about wellbeing and change, and then we'll move into the absolute cornerstone of wellbeing, which is self-determination. Then I'll introduce HELIO to you and go through those 5 different elements of the model. And then we'll bring it all together with a little bit of a discussion about how to activate some of the ideas. And then we'll have a Q&A and good night. We'll be out and away by 8, if not before. I won't keep you any longer than that. And thank you for taking the time tonight. So as I mentioned, the effects of the global pandemic are long-lasting. And, you know, I've heard people refer to the last few years as a bit of a roller coaster ride. And I think it is a really good metaphor. And we're kind of 3 years in now. And if we can just take a moment to think back, this was a really common sentiment in 2020. What is this, and how can I make sure my family and I stay safe and well? 2021, we thought things were getting better, but certainly here in Melbourne they were not, and in other places. How on earth will I get through another year of this awful uncertainty? I wonder if you can, if that resonates for you. In 2022, there really did seem to be a shift, and the shift that I noticed in my work was, how can I embrace all that I've learned, all that I've managed? How can I take an anti-fragile approach and a resilient approach, given all that I've learned, to my life going forward? And I want to really encourage that in 2023. And the way in which I've put this into words is to say, how will I continue to learn and grow this year? Because the roller coaster is not going to stop. We're pretty definite on that. And there's a lot going on in the world at the moment. But it is really about how we're going to intentionally find ways to structure our day-to-day lives so that we are learning and growing rather than, deteriorating and languishing. Now, because I'm very interested in systems, I do always talk about the fact that we exist and hopefully thrive within a series of complex layers, systemic layers. And this is not to mean that we can just blame the system every time something doesn't go the way that we'd like it to go. But it does mean that as an individual, the things that happen to us are very much linked to everything else that's happening around us. And the things that are happening around us, and we can zoom right out here, right out to the edges of the ecosystem, the things that are happening around us have an effect on us too. They ripple through the layers of the system, or they affect us very directly, perhaps. And so we know that the overall health of a system or of a community depends on the well-being of each member. But we know it's not a one-way street, because community well-being is also inextricably linked to individual well-being. So it's incredibly important to belong to a strong and cohesive and healthy community. And that's absolutely essential to improving the well-being of individuals. So I guess I want to say, let's think about well-being not in a silo, as something that we just have to wrestle with. It's deeply interconnected with everything else in life. But there are things that we can do that will then ripple out and have a positive effect on other layers of the system. So, of course, Maturana was a great systems thinker, and he died in 2021. And he loved change. He loved the fact that we are constantly changing and generating our own reality. And he said we're always in this process. There's always uncontrollable change. And I've found over the last couple of years in particular, I've found his work very helpful just in helping me to understand that every time we try to keep something the same, there is this space opens up that creates uncontrollable change. And this wonderful theory, he was a biologist and a philosopher, was of course developed into a big theory of knowledge called autopoiesis, which is self-creation. And so Maturana and Varela, through their whole life's work actually, found that living systems are self-organising. They rely on feedback, reflection and action. We can generate our own reality from moment to moment. Life is not static. It is a process of constant change, and we're not simply observers. We are actually the system. We are part of the system, and we have the capacity to affect the system, hopefully in really heliotropic ways. And of course, that's self-determination, isn't it? You know, when we can self-determine, we have autonomy and agency, control over our lives and control over our decisions and what we want to do with our lives. We have relatedness, we have good relationships with others that are beneficial on both sides, and we have competence. So we have a belief in ourselves and in our capability to do personally fulfilling and meaningful things with our life. So self-determination, Ryan and Desi's big theory, is absolutely crucial to well-being. So here's Helio. It's really about wakefulness. It's about waking up each and every day and consciously showing up each and every day, no matter what is going on. It's made up of 5 theories of well-being, or 5 elements, and I'm going to go through them. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes on each, although health is a little bit longer, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I want to present to you, and I know you have met, some of you have seen these before, 5 daily questions. So this is the HELIO model. It's simple questions that we actually check in with ourselves each day and ask ourselves. So starting with health, how am I and what does my body need today? Engagement, how will I be fully engaged today? i.e., how will I use my strengths today? Learning, how will I create learning in my life today? Interconnection, how can I be in right relationship today? And I'll certainly explain that further. And optimism, how will I infuse positive emotion into this day? Really meaning, how will I adopt an optimistic explanatory style to the things that I encounter today? So, of course, this framework that I have developed is very much based on self-determination and on the work of Maturana, but it's also based on Maslow's theory of human motivation. And we all know this hierarchy of needs. We start at the bottom and we cannot move to the next step unless we have satisfied the bottom. And we certainly can't self-actualize right at the top there, achieve our full potential, unless we have these other layers well and truly embedded. And so the goal tonight and the goal of HELIO is to ask ourselves each day these HELIO questions, to listen, to respond to these questions, and to act upon them each and every day. So let's start with health. It's going to be probably 10 minutes on health and then 5 on the others, because I'm using a model here called the triumvirate of optimal performance, and it's a 3-legged model. And I just find the stool is a great analogy or metaphor to help explain how this works. So if we sit down on a stool and one of the legs is wonky, is not strong or not stable, then we're going to fall off. If we don't fall off immediately, we'll fall off soon afterwards. And so if we think about our health as this 3-layered, 3-layered philosophy, I guess, of living in a healthful way, these 3 layers are nutrition, exercise, and sleep, and they're deeply, deeply interconnected. And so when we ask this question, how am I and what does my body need today, we're really talking about these 3 big legs of the stool. So stress is an interesting thing, isn't it? And we've been under a lot of stress, and we all need some stress in order to function and to feel motivated to learn and grow. But a lot of stress can push us towards poor choices. And I know we will all be able to identify with that. And when it comes to nutrition, we are increasingly making choices about ordering in food. There's been a rapid growth in the percentage of people who order in food now rather than prepare it with natural ingredients that they source themselves and know where they've come from. When we talk about exercise, there's been a rapid progression to indoor lives online, and including for leisure time, but also for work time. And when we talk about sleep, there's also been a rapid progression towards having sleep very much, or the time in which we sleep, very much interrelated with our technology. And so having sleep that is interrupted and disrupted by technology. So we know that these things cause us more stress. We know that poor nutrition is linked to depression. We know that poor sleep is linked to depression and anxiety. We know that spending a lot of time in a sedentary position inside on a screen is linked to anxiety and depression. And so we do need to start thinking about the kinds of stresses that are coming from some of these choices. And of course, the vagus nerve is a big, big part of this when it comes to nutrition. The vagus nerve is autonomic, meaning it's unconscious. It operates without us telling it what to do, and it regulates all of our internal organs and keeps us in homeostasis, meaning keeps us calm, stable, and in rest and digest phase where we can live calmly and we can look after all of our organs. But of course, if we put a lot of stuff in our gut that is poor from a nutritional point of view, then that homeostasis equation is completely disrupted, because the vagus nerve actually it's like a 5-lane superhighway, and 4 of those lanes go north. They go up to the brain. So only 1 lane sends messaging down north to south. So this basically means that our vagus superhighway ensures that our gut and our mental health are very, very intertwined. So what we choose to eat, what we choose to put in our gut, has a direct effect on how we feel and how well we do each and every day. So one of the biggest issues with this, of course, is ultra-processed foods. And one of the ways in which I've learned to work with this is that if I read the ingredients of ultra-processed foods that say you can buy in a supermarket, and if there's anything on that list that I can't buy myself to put in my pantry, then I don't buy the food. And the reason for this is ultra-processed foods, both the ones that we order through Uber Eats and the ones that we buy in supermarkets, they are actually industrial formulations. They are synthesized in laboratories, and they are full of ingredients that the everyday person doesn't have access to. And so we've got to really think about what effect that's having, and how is the vagus nerve then sending all of that north into our mental and cognitive, behavioural headquarters up here above our shoulders. So let's just talk about movement for a little bit and exercise. We know that the average person sits for 9 hours a day. You can see here in this illustration that we've got a stand-up desk there, and hopefully if you do sit a lot for your work, you have the opportunity to stand up from time to time. It's incredibly important, and to move around. The problem with sitting for 9 hours a day, which we never used to do, of course, pre-industrial times, we were actually very physically active outside all day, is that we lie down for a further 8 hours on average a day. And if you add 9 and 8, that's 17, and that's almost 75% of our lives is in a sitting or lying position. So it doesn't take much to work out that that's very poor for our physical well-being, for our psychological well-being, for our emotional and social well-being. And sedentary activity has become a leisure activity. I want to show you 2 studies, pretty interesting studies, both out of Scandinavia. This one is 23,000 participants. And when the researchers looked at people who spent 50% or more leisure time in sedentary pursuits, such as gaming and binge watching television, etc., they found significantly higher and more frequent symptoms of anxiety and depression. Another study, this one's smaller but equally important. These are random controlled trials. 4,000 participants, and the low physical activity leisure time people, so people who chose that for leisure, predicted a 41% increase in prescription medication use for anxiety and depression. So, yeah, it's definitely something to think about, isn't it? And the value add of human movement is just, the research on this is enormous. And for each indicator I have here, there are literally hundreds of research papers to show the value add, the scientific value add of movement outside. Anyone that knows me knows that I am very, very active and find it's a huge part of my own well-being journey. And on this particular photo, I'm bright red because I've just done this big hike up a huge hill, and I'm taking a rest on the way down. But all of these things really resonate for me when I'm outside and moving, and I'm sure that they do for you too. And we actually have to carve out every day, every single day, whether it be very early in the morning or in our lunch break, or, you know, last thing at night, just to have a look at the moon and the stars, some kind of movement outside. So just to finish this exercise element, I just want to I guess point out that there is a bit of a sinister restructuring of human life going on. I'm sure you've already noticed, and a lot of it is designed to minimize our movement, but be very careful, because it also minimizes our ability to do all of these things, and they're all incredibly important. So the longer we spend inside, online, not getting outside, not engaging in healthy nutrition behaviours, the more likely we will find that we actually can't meet this checklist of important life skills. Sleep. Let's move on to sleep. Sleep is a period of sensory isolation, and don't we need that these days? We live in a highly stimulated world, and we do need to find time to actually have some sensory isolation. And sleep, we know, is absolutely critical for our cognition while we're awake, and the impact of sleep loss on waking function is absolutely huge, absolutely huge. And this kind of overnight tech in bed is becoming a real problem. Particularly this little one is 8 years old, this little guy. His father, you can see his name there on the side. He wrote an amazing article for National Geographic. But this is becoming an addiction that is seriously impacting the life quality of people around the world. So if you look at this chart, just find where you are here. And I guess the middle column is the most important one here, because the first column is recommended. The next column is what may be appropriate. So we're all different, and we're not all cookie cutter humans. So someone in my age group, which is this adult one here, as little as 6 hours can be fine for someone in my age group, and as much as 10. But less than 6 and more than 10 is definitely not fine, particularly if it's on an ongoing basis. And so, you know, just like getting up and greeting the sun every day, waking up and experiencing wakefulness, sleep is incredibly important for every day as well. And so I just want to suggest to you, I'm not going to go through these because in the interest of time, but I'm going to put them up, and feel free to take a screenshot, just to say that there are some essentials when it comes to sleep. And if we're not actually doing everything we can to create good sleep patterns, we really run the risk of becoming extremely unwell. And I also just want to note there that if we have any symptoms of sleep apnea, for example, and I don't have time to go into them this evening, but if we do, that needs to be attended to tomorrow. And I actually mean that with all seriousness. Sleep apnea is a very serious disease. It's very on the rise, and it's very, very detrimental to our health and well-being. So if you're struggling with sleep, and that might be part of the problem, I would really highly recommend you activate something tomorrow on that. So let's move to engagement. How do I fully engage my strengths today? That's me in the middle. This is me in my highly engaged mode, including tonight too. I mean, I do love what I do, and I'm very passionate about this work, and I feel I'm good at it, so I'm activating my strengths. But we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, what high engagement actually is. And just to mention that mindfulness is key to that. We cannot be highly engaged and mindless at the same time. And to talk about strengths, how important it is that strengths are known and actually consciously used every day. So this is the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He's one of the founding fathers of the positive psychology movement, wellbeing science movement. And if I can use my mouse here to show you flow, flow basically means optimal engagement, the highest level of engagement that we humans can achieve. It's also known as being in the zone. And if you look at Csikszentmihalyi's model, it shows you that in order to get into this flow zone, we need to have a high challenge level, but our skill level needs to meet that challenge. And you can see what happens if we have a high challenge and low skill, or if we have high challenge and low skill, of course, is here. We are anxious. If we have high skill and low challenge, we get into this very relaxed mode. We don't want to be in flow all the time, but in order to feel really engaged in life, it's incredibly important to use our strengths so that we can be engaged, and so that hopefully from time to time it will lead to flow, because flow is incredibly good for our well-being. So strengths are potentials for excellence. That's the best way to describe them, I think, and they buffer against mental illness. When we use our strengths, we are aware of what they are, we are intentional about how we use them, we're prepared to put the effort in, and we have accessibility, meaning that there are elements in our life and in our ecosystem where we can actually use our strengths, because sometimes we are in positions where we can't fully activate our strengths. So this is a really simple strengths tool. Many of you will have seen this before. There are a number of different strengths tools in the wellbeing science space. There are 3 in particular, and they are the VIA strengths, which is this one, the strengths profile, which has come out of the UK, and the Gallup strengths. And they all measure slightly different things. They're all strengths tools, though. I would really invite you to take a strengths test. I'm going to send you some information on that tomorrow. But once we know our strengths, we can start to actually bring conscious awareness to the use. And we don't have them full on all the time. Overplaying a strength is actually not good for our well-being. And underplaying means it just deteriorates and atrophies and dies. So we do need to think about optimal use here when we're talking about strengths. Context is everything. We adapt our strengths to the context. And strengths are very malleable. They're not personality traits. This is not something that, say, a Myers-Briggs assessment could measure. Strengths are malleable, they're changeable, and they require nuance. They really require nuance. I overplay my strength of kindness sometimes, and I pay the price for that sometimes by being taken advantage of. And so it's really important for me from time to time to recalibrate here and to bring that arrow right back and find my golden mean, find the spot that works for me, for my well-being, and then I can ripple out and help others. But if I'm overplaying a strength, it's probably going to be detrimental to not only my well-being, but the well-being of the people around me. So let's move on to learning. How will I create learning in my life today? I want to talk about learning goals, and I want to point out that even engaging tonight with this webinar and starting to think about daily well-being goals, that's a learning goal in itself. Learning about what you need to be well in 2023 is a really significant learning goal. And if that was the one that you focused on for 2023, I would applaud you for that, because if you give it the awareness and practice and intentionality it deserves, you will have a year that has well-being right throughout it. Learning is about activating our curiosity, and it's good to find someone to do this with. And I know I have people in the room at the moment who I've learnt with and am continuing to learn with. Learning is not supposed to happen in a vacuum, just on your own, because a huge part of learning is collaboration. And, you know, often I'll run this HELIO framework as a whole day workshop or a half day workshop, and we're all learning together about how we can create learning opportunities in our lives. And time again, people go away from that and they've actually set up a plan to be learning buddies on something. So that is super important. When it comes to curiosity, we do need to get curious, and we need to get curious about the light and the shade. And by that I mean, let's think about what might I pursue that interests me for 2023, for example, but also what might I need to unlearn for 2023? What can I leave behind? What can I let go of and leave in 2022 because it's not really serving me anymore? I've used the metaphor of the backpack, and look, it works for me. If I imagine that I'm packing for the journey that is 2023, I want to be really strategic in what I bring with me, and I want to be sensible about what I'm going to leave behind, because I don't know what the journey ahead is for me. I can't look into the future, nor can you. And for many of us might be dealing with really, really difficult things right now. So it's very important to be honest with ourselves about perhaps some of the biases that we carry with us, some of the assumptions that we carry, and perhaps some of the bad habits, just the bad habits that have become a bit entrenched and actually could be left in 2022, never to accompany us again on the journey. So here's an activity for you to think about learning if you'd like to do this. And of course, everything is optional. I've done this and found it really, really useful. Divide your life into decades and consider what you've learned, and try and choose a single big learning for each decade of your life. Certainly for me, my 50s have been learning all about wellbeing science and coaching, and how to run a business and how to start again, how to pick myself up from a really serious injury and find a new way forward. So when I talk about learning, it doesn't have to be an academic thing. It can be learning life lessons. Once you've written down a single big learning for each decade, then project forward and go into the next 2 or 3 decades and just have a play with what you might decide to learn going forward. And none of this is set in stone, but it can be a really interesting, illuminating and fun thing to think about. And also to see that learning is a lifelong pursuit. If we can foster a passion for lifelong learning to the point that we're still prepared to learn something on the day we depart, we're going to find that's going to have a massive wellbeing effect on us, physically, socially, emotionally, psychologically. So let's go to interconnectedness now. Just checking my time. I'm doing okay. I talk a lot about right relationship in my work. And again, this is from a systems point of view, and I'll unpack that a little bit in a minute. But, you know, we're very social mammals, and our need to belong is undeniable, and we deny it at our peril. And that is because we co-regulate one another's ANS. So we were talking about homeostasis. We keep one another in homeostasis. We also tip one another out of homeostasis. But when we find the right people to be with, to be close to, and this includes other mammals too, we can actually co-regulate one another's autonomic nervous system and stay within homeostasis as much as possible. Of course, interconnection, we're very digitally connected, and I'll talk a bit about that tonight. And nature connection, I'm hoping that nature connection message is just coming through with every single slide, but it is deeply embedded in our DNA. We were designed to have a lifelong reciprocal connection to the natural environment, and we also deny that at our peril. So when I talk about in right relationship, I'm talking about being in relationship with ourselves, a really self-compassionate, supportive, confident, warm, but also honest relationship with ourselves. I'm talking about relationships with others, including those that we find challenging and including those that we don't even know. Just because we don't know someone, that doesn't mean that there isn't some sense of a common humanity relationship. And of course, our relationship with our planet and all non-human species, plant, animal, and otherwise. And I think the pandemic, again, a great learning that came out of the pandemic is that we need to be connected to nature, because we just shrivel up inside, particularly if we have to stay inside. And so many of us rediscovered that relationship with the natural world in 2020 and 2021. And long may that continue, because, of course, that's that ripple effect through the systems to create an overall ecosystem of wellbeing. Now, the social brain network, I'll just touch briefly on this. It's just to explain that when we are in relationship, it's not easy. We all know this, but we also know that the strength of our relationships is the single biggest predictor of wellbeing that there is. And I know I always mention the Grant study, and some of you might be rolling your eyes now and saying, oh, not the Grant study again. But it is literally the greatest longitudinal study on human relationships. It's in its 8th decade. And we know that when we take care to build strong social networks with others, then we have a really strong possibility to thrive across the lifespan. But it's hard. And there's a great analogy about, if you imagine planes flying from city to city, and you've all seen these maps, our brains, the same kind of thing happens in our brains when we're trying to relate to others. We have 6 separate hubs, and then everything that is happening during that interaction, there are messages being exchanged between these 6 hubs. And, you know, sometimes we have beautiful, smooth flying, and other times we get a lot of turbulence. And it's about knowing this and being patient with ourselves and others, but doing the work to develop good, healthy, reciprocal relationships. And then, of course, techno-stress. Again, I won't go into too much detail here, except to say that there's stacks of research on this. It's very strong research that excessive digital connection leads to just this other layer of stress that we're only beginning to come to terms with now. And so if you have an over-dependence, if you are consuming too much information, if you are finding yourself really engaging in social comparison through social media, if you are saying things online that you'd never say face-to-face, and if you are finding that you feel constantly undermined in terms of privacy and security, that they are all indicators of techno-stress. And so taking the time to design a way forward that is not totally and utterly reliant on technology is super, super important for our wellbeing. And we can make plans every day on this. I wrote a blog very recently about this, and I'll certainly provide a link to that in the information that I send you tomorrow. So we're going to finish with optimism for our model. Now, optimism is not Pollyanna thinking. It's not, oh, cheer up, everything will be okay. It's not toxic positivity. It is actually success-orientated, grounded thinking. And it quietens our negativity bias, and it builds our confidence. And it is really actually very, very important. These are 2 amazing medical practitioners in the US that write a lot about wellbeing. And I just love this quote when we think about optimism and positive emotion. When our thinking about the past limits our effectiveness in the present, we must rethink the situation to provide a better future. Reframing allows us to interpret our experiences in more positive and productive ways. So basically what these two amazing women are highlighting is that we've got the past, the present, and the future right there. And we're very good. We can tell ourselves very compelling stories. We've got some great narratives going on up here above the shoulders. But a lot of these things are potentially cognitive distortions. And, there are 15 identified cognitive distortions that a lot of people in behavioural sciences work with, and I can certainly send them to you as well. But they're things like polarised thinking, overgeneralisation, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, blaming others, believing that we're right on everything, personalising everything, believing that we are a victim and that things that happen to us are directly related to some personal kind of vendetta against us. All of these things are cognitive distortions. So optimism or optimistic explanatory style is actually about cognitive reframing. And we should be really doing this every day, because if we're not, if we go back to those mermaids, we have to remember this, that what we focus on expands and grows and becomes our reality. And you only have to look at that to know that we really do. It's really worthwhile to think about what we're thinking about. So this is the last thing I'll share with you tonight, because I want to have some time for questions. This, of course, is the other founding father of the positive psychology and wellbeing science movement, Martin Seligman's work. And I want to just briefly take you through this, because if you're not familiar with it, it is quite a fabulous model. So if we think about an adverse event, and look, you can do this yourself. I want to caution though, choose something that's kind of a 4 out of 10, no higher than 4 out of 10. In order for you to be psychologically safe in this space, I'm asking you, imploring you not to choose something that is, a very high adverse event, such as a serious illness or, you know what I'm talking about there. So if we choose an adverse event, something that has upset us, and just describe it without any opinion or bias or belief or any of this cognitive distortion thinking, we can just describe it. So, for me, it might be that I've pitched for some work and I have missed out, even though I put a lot of effort into it and I think I'm ideally suited. I think Heliotropia is the company to go with, but I've missed out. So this next step, B, is really important. So what is my belief system on this? And this is where I can actually really start to fall apart, because I can start to say, oh my gosh, I'll never make it in this industry. I don't think what I'm doing is of any value. I'm just wasting my time. I've spent all of this time learning and working, and it's not getting anywhere. I'm going to have to close my business. So these are all the beliefs that might go through. And of course, the consequences of that, the C of A, B, C, D, E, is that we can start to feel very, very negative and very down on ourselves. And those consequences are not good for our well-being, obviously. So the D is the really important bit here. D is actually disputing the belief. So just taking one, for example, and saying, actually, it might not be that the quality of my work is not up to scratch. It might actually be that they have another client they've worked with before who they know has been able to deliver in the past, and, just for safety's sake, they're going with that person, and it's actually nothing to do with me. And so this generates a more optimistic alternative belief about A, the adverse event. And then E is super important too. Once we do this, we will notice that there is a shift in our energy, And it's really cognitive reframing. And the shift in the energy is that we can then move forward in a more positive way so that it's not going to impact everything else that we do for that day or the next day. So there are the 5 daily questions. We've just got about 5 minutes to go. So I'll just go through here. I'm going to send this tomorrow. This is just a chart to choose some daily goals, just to make it very, very deliberate. And once this practice becomes embedded, you will just naturally go through these questions each day and be aware of them during the day. But for now, you might want to create an intentional SMART goal around them. I'll certainly send this to you tomorrow. So there's HELIO. I always make a big sketch note of my webinars or in fact any workshop that I do. And I would like to encourage you to think about this yourself with your own well-being. You might write my well-being in the middle and then sketch note around all the ideas that you have, all the things you're already doing, the things that you want to do, and the areas that you've kind of failed at before and how you're going to address those, and the possible opportunities you have in the wellbeing space. All right. So if we can imagine an upward spiral of heliotropic effect, I'm hoping you're feeling that a little bit tonight, given that we've spent nearly an hour together. But this is all about becoming aware, imagining a wellbeing embedded 2023, experimenting with lots of ideas, reflecting on how they go and then adjusting them accordingly, resetting if things don't go well for you, and then embedding some really good practices. I'm here to help. We don't never know which way the wind's going to blow until we get up each day. So I am here to help. I'm very available to help you. And I want to finish with this beautiful metaphor of the waves by Gunter Pauli, who you may know. He's a great systems thinker. We are not the waves, we are the surfers. So we actually need to take the waves as they come and adjust and adapt and work with them. And that is what life is like every single day. So this is how you can contact me, but also I'll give you this information tomorrow. And I'm going to